network America trusts, period.
Tonight on War Stories, a young monarch caught between East and West.
When it was finished,
Russia had become the bogeyman, the number one enemy.
Hitler's interest can be summed up in one word: oil.
American flyboys trapped behind enemy lines.
I would think, well, I guess this is it.
The Russians were very brutal. They took what they wanted.
In the jaws of hell, Eastern Europe in World War II. That's next on War Stories. This is the Calea Victoriei, Victory Way, in the heart of Bucharest, Romania. This city was once called the Paris of the East. I'm Oliver North. This is War Stories. Like most of Eastern Europe during World War II, Romania was trapped in the jaws of hell between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Under the boot of their fascist dictator Ion Antonescu, some 19 million Romanians were forced into a reluctant alliance with the Third Reich. It was a bitter pill for all, none more so than for their young King Michael. In tonight's episode, meet brave Americans who were fought in and were rescued from this then unknown part of the world. And in an exclusive interview with King Michael of Romania, hear the story of an inexperienced monarch caught in a tangled web between East and West. Eastern Europe, one of the most overlooked chapters of World War II. These are pictures from that forgotten front. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Romania. This outer edge of Europe has been called the lands between, a region defined by its vulnerability to shifts in power between its dominant neighbors. During World War II, it was caught in a vice. To the west, an obvious enemy, Adolf Hitler.
Dieses Deutschland stinkst!
To the east, lurking in the shadows, ruthless Joseph Stalin. Though officially an ally, he'd already murdered at least 7 million of his own people and had sinister plans to expand his communist empire. For the thousands of Americans who found themselves in these foreign lands, it's a place they'll always remember.
That one woman in Romania, I'll never forget that woman for giving me my life again.
I realized that we were in for trouble, but not for a minute did I want to quit.
During the 1930s, the Fuhrer and his Nazi party henchmen plotted European domination from their mountaintop refuge in the German village of Berchtesgaden. Crown Prince Michael of Romania was only 17 when he and his father, King Carol II, met Hitler in 1938. Was he surrounded by military people?
Oh, with all their sisters. Oh, the black one.
Michael of Hohenzollern is one of the last surviving heads of state from World War II. We met him at Elizabeta Palace in Bucharest. On the two extremes, you have the communists on the left trying to influence politics in Romania. You have the Iron Guard and its fascist perspective trying to influence politics on the other extreme.
The Bolsheviks already were in power. They tried to infiltrate here also. And slowly, there was a sort of an extreme right movement. Fifth column, they call it.
The so-called Iron Guard was the most prominent rightist movement. King Carol II, he was no friend of democracy.
Professor Keith Hitchens penned 20 books and has spent over 40 years studying Romania. He teaches history at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Romania becomes an essential part of the German war machine, even before the war starts.
Germany is playing a very clever game in Eastern Europe. They're using their German economic power to woo Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland.
In Hitler's government, do they recognize particularly the need for oil?
Absolutely.
By August 1939, Hitler had already annexed Austria and part of Czechoslovakia. 1,000 miles away, Joseph Stalin purged, killed, and enslaved millions of his own people while making secret plans to Sovietize Europe all the way to the English Channel. It was the clash of titans, and Romania was caught in the middle.
German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop flies to Moscow to sign the German-Russian non-aggression treaty. The announcement of that pact was the bombshell.
8 days before the Blitzkrieg on Poland, Hitler and Stalin struck a monumental deal, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
But then there was a secret part of the treaty in which they essentially divided up Eastern Europe. They decided, for example, how much of Poland each side would get. The Soviet Union was given a free hand in Estonia and Latvia, and Lithuania.
News of this arrangement stunned the world, especially the young prince's father, King Carol, because Stalin also had his eyes on the easternmost Romanian province, Bessarabia. From 1812 to 1918, Bessarabia had been part of Tsarist Russia. Following the Bolshevik Revolution and the end of the First World War, it declared independence from the new Soviet regime and voted to be unified with Romania.
And that is when they call it the Greater Romania.
Greater Romania, including Transylvania and Bessarabia, came into being at the end of World War I, following the Treaty of Versailles. With these newly acquired territories, the kingdom had a population of 15 million, rich in oil, timber, and coal. It was also home to vampire lore and the infamous Vlad the Impaler, better known as Count Dracula.
Hungary would like to recover Transylvania. Soviet Russia never recognized the loss of Bessarabia.
The situation was getting a bit out of hand. So all these things weakened my father's position quite a lot.
King Carol was in the midst of a national catastrophe.
And then we got the ultimatum from the Russians in 1940.
The Romanians had to leave very quickly.
Stalin got what he wanted, Bessarabia and the smaller province of northern Bukovina. By 3 July 1940, nearly 4 million people and 20,000 square miles of territory were firmly in Soviet hands. Just when King Carol thought it couldn't get worse, another blow.
Hungary demanded back Transylvania.
Romanians considered Transylvania to be the cradle of their nation. Like Bessarabia, it officially became part of Romania after the First World War. But Hungary had held it since the Middle Ages and wanted it back. Hitler personally brokered the deal.
And the German delegation, I believe, literally pulled a map out in which the boundary lines had already been made as to what Hungary would get, and made it very plain to the Romanians that they could accept or suffer consequences.
Because France had fallen.
Absolutely.
Britain was being bombed.
Absolutely. And what was on the minds of all Romanian political leaders was what had happened to Poland. And there was great fear that Germany and the Soviet Union would simply decide to divide up Romania.
Romania lost 6 million people and a third of her territory with the cession of Transylvania, Bessarabia, and northern Bukovina. King Carol was devastated.
One disaster after another. You can't survive. So what he does is he looks around for somebody who can save him.
One of them was the cavalry general, the famous Antonescu.
The 58-year-old Ion Antonescu was born in the riverside town of Petești, 60 miles northwest of Bucharest. A pro-Hitler anti-Semite, Antonescu had long been a ruthless critic of King Carol.
But Carol, in this situation, knows that he's got to do something drastic or he's out. So he appoints Antonescu as prime minister. And one of the first things that Antonescu does is to demand that Carol abdicate. And Carol has no choice and abdicates.
I suddenly found myself in the wind, so to speak.
Crown Prince Michael was only 19 when his father abdicated in September of 1940. A teenager becomes king in the midst of war. That's next on War Stories.
The captioning for this program is brought to you.
Son, Michael, a 19-year-old with a penchant for fast cars and airplanes. On 6 September 1940, the teenager ascended the throne.
Your Majesty, would you give us the connection between your family and that of the royal family in England?
My grandmother, she was the granddaughter of one of the granddaughters of Queen Victoria.
In a bizarre twist, Michael had been king once before when he was 6. His father had renounced the throne and fled the country with his mistress, Elena Lupescu. His parents' bitter divorce resulted in the 8-year exile of Michael's mother, Queen Helen.
As far as the running the state and the political system and all that, I was never taught anything.
But officially the head of state.
Yes, that yes.
And so it's a dictatorship under Antonescu. Would he have to come to you to get your signature or your approval for any of the measures that he took?
No, not at all. Antonescu considered me as a child. There's nothing to play with.
Young King Michael comes to the throne.
Yes.
What power does he really have?
Very little. Antonescu exercises real power. He was certain also that he could control this young teenager.
He called himself, the Romanian word is conducător, which means the leader. In other words, like Hitler or Führer.
One of the first things Antonescu did was to bring back Michael's mother, Queen Helen, for whom he had great respect.
Just before Hitler invades Russia, Antonescu goes to meet with Hitler. Did Antonescu know about Barbarossa, Hitler's plan to invade the Soviet Union?
It's very possible he did, but he never told me.
Does he make a commitment in that trip for Romanian troops to fight for Hitler?
Absolutely. And there was also an agreement that the Germans could send in military advisors to train the Romanian army. And of course, thousands and thousands and thousands of German troops began to enter Romania.
Hitler also appointed 54-year-old Baron Manfred von Killinger as German ambassador to Romania.
He was more Nazi than Hitler himself. Awful character.
The alliance between Hitler and Antonescu was a match made in hell.
Hitler's interest in Romania can be summed up with one word: oil.
Ernest Volkmann is the author of numerous books and has written about espionage in Eastern Europe during World War II.
And without that oil, German tanks weren't going to move and German planes weren't going to fly. So Hitler, at all costs, wanted to keep Romania.
Almost all Romanian political leaders were conscious of the fact that if they were going to survive, they had to have the support of at least one great power. That power could not be Russia, because Russia had become for Romanians the bogeyman, the number one enemy.
Hitler offered them a precious deal. He said, look, you come with me, you get all this territory back. And it won't cost you anything.
June 1941, Hitler unleashed 3 million Wehrmacht troops into Russia. Alongside the Germans, 500,000 Romanian infantrymen supported by 1,000 aircraft and 3 cavalry brigades.
My mother found it out on the BBC and said, you know, Romania declared war on the Russians. So by the time I got ready for that, I called up Mihai I said, what's going on here? Is it true? And he said, yes.
At the time, the young king supported the invasion. He saw it as the only way to recover the 20,000 square miles of territory lost to Stalin.
All our population, myself included, considered that Bessarabia was absolutely Romanian. It was perceived by us, at least, as a national thing, as a patriotic act to get back our province.
What he didn't know was that Antonescu's war against Stalin would spell Romania's doom. In Washington, an apprehensive President Roosevelt followed the escalating war in Europe. Then suddenly, America was at war. Meet the crew of B-24 Liberator Destiny Deb, next on War Stories. By August 1941, Romanian territory lost to Stalin had been recovered. 20-year-old King Michael visited his troops and believed they'd be coming home soon. But behind the king's back, Antonescu promised Hitler he'd stand by him throughout the war.
And then the decision is made to send Romanian troops all the way into Russia.
That was Antonescu, purely him. So there I did put my foot down. I said, not so. We have no business being in your place anyhow.
Antonescu ignored the king and sent more soldiers into the maw, all the way to Stalingrad. Over the next 3 years, some 70,000 young Romanians would die and 500,000 would be wounded or captured. The young monarch sent a veiled plea for help to Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
Is a New Year's Day address that you give in 1943 that kind of starts the movement against Antonescu.
Yes, I don't remember the text exactly, but it had something to do about hoping for peace. Antonescu was very angry, and the Germans were furious.
Determined to topple Antonescu, Michael and other resistance leaders, including the illustrious Dr. Ilie Maniu, joined forces in the fledgling Romanian underground.
We used to be brought to night to see me and so on, and some of my people went to see them on the sly.
Though King Michael needed the help, the cold reality was that FDR and Churchill had already decided Romania would fall into the Soviet sphere of influence.
We thought respect Russian interests, support the Russian war effort. After all, they were grinding the German army. So Washington observed, but Washington didn't engage.
Named for his father, Frank Wisner was all of 5 years old when his namesake headed the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS Bureau, in Istanbul, Turkey.
And it was from there that he was in touch with resistance or opposition elements behind German lines in southeastern Europe.
Today, this building is a luxury hotel, but during World War II, it was headquarters for Hitler's diplomats and officers in Romania. A wartime nest of intrigue and espionage, it was once described as a meeting place of continental spies, political conspirators, and adventurers.
It was like, you know, spot the spook. That was the game. You had all the waiters, the chambermaids, the bartenders who were making huge amounts of money for keeping tabs on all these spies. In 1944, the OSS had no representation in Eastern Europe to speak of. They had a major station in Istanbul that was responsible for the Balkans.
Father dressed in Romanian army boots.
Young Wisner would follow in his father's footsteps and spend 37 years in public service. He served as ambassador 4 times and as an undersecretary in the Departments of State and Defense.
Nice one of him there. Good smile.
He's inspired by his father's work in Eastern Europe during World War II.
He was particularly in close touch with Romania, where there was an opposition movement to Marshal Antonescu, particularly Dr. Maniu's party. I remember my father telling me stories of the effect that they began receiving signals from real Romanian opposition figures, and that these were precisely the sorts of openings that they'd want to exploit.
These Ploiești refineries are just 40 miles north of Bucharest. During World War II, they supplied almost half of Hitler's black gold. By early 1943, the skies above Romania were full of American bombers trying to cut this vital flow of fuel to the Third Reich.
That was where the Luftwaffe got all of their aviation gasoline. And that's why they had the knockabouts to ensure supremacy of the air.
I didn't know anything about Romania. Our target was the marshalling yards, railroad yards near Ploiești.
It was nose turret gunner Bill Feely's 34th mission and the 35th for his radio operator Paul Swearingen. On 24 April 1944, both 20-year-olds were flying in Destiny Dead, a B-24 Liberator.
As we dropped our bombs, I suddenly felt the aircraft shake.
The shell came right through the center of the airplane, cut the 3-foot hole.
And all of a sudden, the little door between the bomb bay and the aft part of the aircraft opened up, and a flood of gasoline came through.
The shell knocked the glass off of the turret, and knock me out.
And I knew we were in trouble. We pulled out of formation, lost altitude, and finally the situation became untenable, and the pilot said, "Okay, guys, time to go."
He said, "Good luck and God bless you guys."
All 10 crew members survived as prisoners of war. By the summer of 1944, the situation was grim for Romania. Coming up, the young King Michael turns against Hitler in hopes of saving his country from a Soviet invasion.
Now all the refineries in the rich Povestiri cluster were damaged or knocked out.
Each plane and each man helped to shorten the war.
24 April 1944. Bill Feely, Paul Swearingen, and the rest of B-24 Liberator Destiny Deb's crew bailed out over enemy territory in Romania. Did everybody get out?
Everybody got out alive. When a bomber got shot down with 10 men on it, on average, only 3 got out alive.
War Stories took Bill Feely back to the very same refinery complex in Ploiești he had been sent to bomb. When you get on the ground, you rip off your parachute.
Right.
Take off your harness.
Right.
Were you immediately surrounded at that point?
I was surrounded by farmers and little kids, and there was a woman in front of me. She lunged toward me. There was a man behind me. She started to beating on him, stopping him from doing something. And I slowly turned around. Here's a man with a 3-foot axe over his head, ready to plant it in my skull. She stopped him and saved my life.
Feely later found out the farmer had lost 2 children during an American bombing mission.
And I didn't have enough guts to tell him I was on that raid.
Feely and Swearingen were interrogated by a Romanian officer and eventually joined some 600 Allied prisoners of war in a camp in Bucharest. What's the living condition like?
I'm having lice crawl up my nose and a lot of in my ear and many other places.
The worst thing is we didn't get a lot of good food. I still remember the day I got a piece of jawbone in my soup, complete with teeth.
Is this the prison camp that had belonged to King Michael's regiment?
Yes, right.
Is that where he came to visit?
Yes. He came in there and he says, "I cannot visit you anymore because of the situation we have here with our occupiers. I wish I could do something, but I can't."
But he did provide enough money to give each POW 10 cigarettes a day. They were well received by all the POWs who felt very kindly about King Michael.
Bitter house-to-house fighting that has culminated in a Nazi disaster.
Stalin's dream of a communist empire was fast becoming reality as his Red Army crushed Hitler's troops and swept into Eastern Europe. Over 2 million Soviet troops now exacted fierce revenge on anyone who'd cooperated with Hitler. Churchill and Roosevelt ignored the Soviet savagery. What mattered to them was that the Red Army continued to fight to the death against the Nazis.
A deal had been struck. And there were deals within deals within deals. So long as those Red Army troops were sitting on Eastern Europe, what was anybody to do?
Washington was not in any deep and sustained way planning for the post-war period or alive and sensitive to what would be Russian ambitions to take over, occupy, and create a communist buffer.
Joe Stalin, when he talks to FDR, says, "Oh, it's going to be no problem. We're going to restore democratic states in Eastern Europe, and then the Red Army will go home." Simple. William Donovan, head of the OSS, says, "I don't believe him."
Donovan was highly suspicious and desperately wanted to expose Stalin. Little did the spy master know he'd soon get his chance.
By August 23rd, 1944, the Soviet army was massed on the Romanian border, and there was nothing that the Romanian army could do to stop them. The king, Maniu, and others had waited as long as they possibly could.
We decided that now something has to be done, otherwise Romania was finished.
When Antonescu is summoned to the palace that morning, does he have any idea what's going to happen to him?
No. No, he doesn't. The king was very blunt.
I said, the situation is so bad in the front, get out of this. So he said, no, I'm not doing that. I gave my word to Hitler.
And I think Antonescu thought he was Not serious.
Bluffing.
Bluffing.
I said, well, I'm very sorry, got nothing else I can do. I got 3 NCOs, the door burst open, and the 3 of them come in and put their hands on him.
Antonescu was stunned at his arrest.
Antonescu turned around and spat at him. And said, tomorrow you'll all be hanging in the square outside.
What was the German response?
They took us, they came. They bombed several points, but especially the palace. They wanted to get me.
Hitler was furious. For 7 days, his bombs rained down on Bucharest. But by 31 August, the Nazi army was in full retreat. On that same day, led by Marshal Radion Malinovsky, 500,000 Soviet troops marched into Bucharest as liberators.
The most striking feature of the pictures of the Red Army's entry into the Romanian capital is the welcome given by the people of Bucharest.
The Russians were very brutal. They raped many of the women. They took what they wanted.
How long is it before the Soviets start to install, essentially, a puppet government?
They began almost immediately.
They wanted to create new society. That was the main objective of the communists in Europe.
Directly west of Romania, Yugoslavia was already entrenched in a bloody civil war between communist Josip Broz Tito and royalist Draza Mihailovic. Sava Stepanovic was 16 years old when he joined Mihailovic's Chetniks in 1943. By then, the focus of the royalists had changed from fighting the Germans to fighting against Tito and communism.
How big was the resistance unit that you were with?
About 150. When Mihailovic started the resistance, the Germans had a tremendous repression on the population. Hitler gave instruction that for each German soldier, 100 hostages would be killed, executed, and 54 wounded.
Yugoslavia can only be described as a political 8-ring circus. You had Tito heading up the communist partisans who were in opposition to the non-communists known as the Chetniks, who were initially supported by Great Britain and the United States, but later lost their support. Meanwhile, Adolf Hitler is saying, what I'm going to do is kill everybody there if I have to.
Tito wasn't fighting the Germans. He was fighting Mihailovic.
That's good. He was fighting Mihailovic. For Tito, it was probably more important to fight Mihailovic because he was a real enemy who is denying him to come in power.
Like Romania, Yugoslavia was tangled in a web of opposing political ideologies. Both would fall behind the Iron Curtain, their people subject to decades of brutal communist regime. There's more war stories from Eastern Europe just ahead on the Fox News Channel. Stay with us. 1944, King Michael and the Romanian underground ousted Hitler's puppet, Ion Antonescu, in a dramatic coup.
We were doing this to try and get out of the war.
How do you find out about the coup?
I was friendly with this sergeant. You know, he come over and says, Pace, Pace, Maduka Casa, Datukia Casa. Translation, I'm going home and you're going home.
Bill Feely, Paul Swearingen, and over 1,000 other Allied POWs were free, but had no way of getting home.
We had to devise our own ways of doing it.
Colonel Gunn, the ranking officer, of course, was responsible for us. He went to the Romanian military and see if they had any way to get us home.
We found this Romanian prince, and he taught Colonel Gunn to crawl into this Messerschmitt 109. And he would fly him to Italy and land at the 15th Air Force.
In a German fighter?
In a German fighter. They painted the American flag on the side of the airplane.
All he had to do was to go to the powers that be, tell them our predicament, how many we were, and they would send somebody to Bucharest and make arrangements to get us out.
I see this Messerschmitt flying over the field, and I said, God, why aren't the Limeys shooting them down?
23-year-old combat cameraman Al Saldarini witnessed Colonel James Gunn's arrival. His Romanian pilot, Prince Bazu Kentakazino, stepped out first and said,
Anybody got a screwdriver? So the captain jumped down on the wing, walked to the back of the fuselage, and started to unscrew the plate where the radios were. And as soon as that dropped off, we all saw, my
golly, GI boots. And Captain Gunn came out of the thing. In the meantime, I was jumping up and down, mad as a hornet, because my cameras were 3/4 mile away across the field. So I lost a great picture.
Bill, Colonel Gunn also carries a message from the new government.
Yes, he did. The message was, please have the American and the British occupy Romania. Please don't let the Russians occupy Romania. The message went to Eisenhower. Eisenhower sent it to Churchill and Roosevelt, and they said no. And the Romanian people, with that little word no, had to suffer 45 more years of a cruel dictatorship to satisfy the greed and the lust for power of Joe Stalin. They acquiesced to give Stalin what he wanted.
In Washington, OSS Chief Bill Donovan was thrilled. King Michael's coup had given him a chance to send in his spies.
Well, said Donovan, I see my opportunity here. I can send in a delegation that can take the POWs back home, but at the same time, they can keep their eyes open. As far as he was concerned, there's only one man for the job, and it was Frank Wisner.
He had a particular mission, and that was to collect intelligence on the German dispositions in Romania so that we could bomb the German lines of retreat. It was extremely successful.
The tricky part now came. Let's find out, what do the Russians want to do?
The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, began to move in and take control, began infiltrating and manipulating Romanian politics and adding political pressure to the Romanian government to take orders from Moscow.
The most serious problem that Wisner began to report on was the Russians didn't intend to liberate Romania. They intended to take it. No matter what Joe Stalin said, in reality, there was a plan, and they could see it unfold.
He began to see that. He witnessed it, testified to it, communicated his views to Washington. He was deeply concerned about the threat of the Soviet Union.
What happened in Romania was a preview of what was going to happen in the rest of Eastern Europe.
That was a bad shock for us.
29 August 1944. 4 months after being shot down, Destiny Deb's crew was finally going home.
They rescued 1,160 prisoners of war, 400 miles behind the German lines without a single casualty.
The rescue operation was a well-publicized success and caught on film. This is 20-year-old Bill Feely, just moments before his flight to freedom.
It took 3 or 4 days to carry all the POWs back to Italy. But it was a trip we'll all remember.
Bill Feely was a prisoner of war the last time he saw King Michael. When War Stories returns, the dramatic reunion of an American airman and the last Romanian monarch. September 1944. With 500,000 Soviet troops in Romania, Stalin's plan to Sovietize Europe was underway. In Washington, OSS agent Frank Wisner's reports created serious alarm.
Is he saying that this great dream we have of post-war cooperation with the Soviet Union is a dream, it's a fantasy? Is he saying that Stalin is lying to us? That there's going to be an Iron Curtain? Is that what he's saying? Yes, that's exactly what he was saying.
The decision is made by Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, essentially.
Yes.
To leave Romania behind the Iron Curtain. You were never consulted.
No, never. I never even heard about it until much later.
The communist march to power was slow, but certain.
It was a losing battle all the beginning.
Take over the ministries, they take over the business of government.
They're aiming to do that. The leaders of the Romanian Communist Party go to Moscow. They want to know from Stalin when to make the move to seize power. And he says, in essence, go do it. And they put enormous pressure on King Michael, who has the constitutional power to appoint the prime minister. And so at last he appoints Groza, March 6, 1945.
Petro Groza's regime began 43 years of brutal communist tyranny. What happens to the key players? Let's start with Antonescu.
Antonescu is brought to trial in 1946 in Bucharest. He was tried as a war criminal.
On 1 June 1946, Ian Antonescu was executed by firing squad at the hands of the communists. During these sad and trying times, Michael found love when he met Princess Anne of Bourbon-Parma. For her service as a battlefield ambulance driver during the war, the French awarded her the prestigious Croix de Guerre for heroism. The couple decided to get married within a year, but just before their wedding, the unimaginable happened. On 30 December 1947, the Communist Party chairman demanded that Michael abdicate.
He said, if you don't do this quick enough, we are going to be obliged to shoot 1,000 young students that we had arrested in Bucharest. I just said, I can't take the responsibility of having people murdered just for me to stay on here, so now to sign it.
And right afterwards, the Romanian People's Republic is proclaimed a communist state.
The young monarch left in silence, eventually settling in Switzerland, where he'd spend most of his 45-year exile. During his absence, Romania suffered terribly. The scars of Eastern Europe's tortured past are still evident here in Bucharest. The bullet holes in this building behind me are from the 1989 revolution that overthrew the last communist dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu. In 1992, 3 years after the revolution, Michael was finally allowed to return to his country.
I was allowed in for 3 days. And that was quite something because there were such crowds that came out.
Michael and Anne had 5 daughters and continue to live a simple life in Switzerland. Along with his eldest daughter, he founded and supports the Princess Margarita of Romania Foundation, which promotes the spiritual and social renewal of the country. Michael's distant relative, Charles, Prince of Wales, once referred to him as a beacon of hope. For one American, he was a savior.
Your Majesty, this is Bill Feely.
Your Majesty, my pleasure to see you once again. The last time I saw you was 62 years ago in the prison camp at your garrison. Thank you for being so kind to us there under those conditions.
Well, it's very rare to see someone again like that.
Right, and it's been a long time.
Bill, you had mentioned to me that you believed, and a lot of the other airmen believed, that had it not been for King Michael, you might well have been sent to Germany.
That's right. We understood that at the time that, and some of the people told us that you had told the Germans that if any people got shot down over Romania, they will be your prisoners.
That's true.
And you prevented us from going to Germany, and we thank you that, and everybody remembers that, and they thank you from the bottom of their heart. They were memorable days, and we thank you and your lovely people here in Romania.
There's more war stories from Eastern Europe just ahead. Don't go away. There's an old Romanian proverb, when it's all said and done, advice comes too late. That's certainly the case for Eastern Europe, including Romania and Yugoslavia, once pawns in the great power struggle between communism and fascism. Even after the war, their populations were forced to endure decades of brutal repression because of decisions made by Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. Millions died hoping for liberty. Today, nearly all the people of Eastern Europe enjoy increasing personal and economic freedom. For those like King Michael and the World War II veterans who lived through those trying times, theirs is a war story that deserves to be told. In Bucharest, Romania, I'm Oliver North for War Stories. Good night.